was it? I was 30 seconds ahead of the game. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 2020 iTalk meeting. Thanks staff for pulling this together in interesting times. Anyone who is on the phone for the first time, welcome. This is not how we typically do it, but we have done it for the past few months this way. But please, thank you for taking the time to join us. Before we delve into the agenda, can I confirm with the clerk that we have a quorum, Linda? I'm sorry.
Good morning.
Tessa?
That's okay. We do have a quorum.
Perfect. All right, so I am going to refer to Mr. Needham to go over some of the particulars related to the format of the meeting. So Ariana, go ahead and take that away, please.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, so this is really just a friendly reminder that we have a newer process for both members of the committee as well as public. And the primary members will be using their cameras, kind of like we did last time, and we'll take live public comments as well. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and that will be Vice Chair Kenny's cue to recognize that you want to speak. And then as noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to the emailed comments that we might receive, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. In order to provide the live comments, they must register for the GoToMeeting webinar on the link that was provided on the cover page of the agenda. Join the meeting by clicking on the Join Webinar link that is provided in the confirmation email that they would receive upon registering. And then when public comments are called for on an item, click on the raised hand icon in the GoToWebinar control panel, which is on the top right-hand side of your screen. Then you would be called upon by the name you registered with and may provide comments for the allotted time. There is no need to mute your microphone. The organizers will unmute you when you are called upon. And the instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page for today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. And all comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. Thank you. That's
all right, Ariana, thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to item number 1, approval of the meeting minutes from June. Tessa, do we have any speakers or any public comment for this item?
I do not see any raised hands at this time.
All right. With that, we will go ahead and move into committee member comments. Are there any comments from the committee members about the minutes from the last meeting? Okay,
Mr. Vice Chair, I have a question.
Ms. House?
Yes. On item 9 of the minutes, there was an action to approve the annual report for iTalk. It says in here with an amendment. I am just asking if the amendment can be at least listed what it was, because there's no record of it. And since there was an amendment to the report before the motion could be approved, it would be important to include what the amendment was.
Yes, absolutely. We could definitely do that. We could amend these minutes. You could still approve them today, or we can bring them back to your next meeting if you would rather approve them at that point. And we could add, I believe there were two requested changes to the annual report. You went ahead and approved it with those 2 changes which were made. So it is up to the committee how you'd like to proceed, but we can definitely make that change. Yeah.
I'm okay with approving it. In fact, I will move to approve, but as long as that just gets updated.
Okay,
thank
we will make sure that happens. Yeah.
All right, so there is a motion. Is there a second?
I can second that, Michael.
Thank you. I did not know who made that second, so if you could just identify yourself.
Oh, there I am. Okay. Hey.
All right. I think Ariana, am I correct? So the procedure is still turn on your camera if you're going to speak?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. That will make it easier for the vice chair to recognize who's speaking. Thank you.
All right, Les. Thank you for that. So we have a motion and a second. Tessa, if you could call for the vote, please.
Thank you. For the licensed civil traffic engineer, Vice Chair Kinney.
Approve.
Contractor construction is absent. And biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Approve.
Finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
I missed the meeting, so I'll abstain.
Nice to meet
Licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Approve.
And CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Approved.
Thank you. That item passes with 1 abstention and 1 member absent.
All right, well, thank you, Tessa. So let's move on to item number 2. Item number 2 is public comments on any item that is not on the agenda. Any comments for items on the agenda will be heard with those agenda items, but this is a general public's opportunity to speak on any item not on the agenda. Tessa, do we have any speaker slips for this item?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
All right, then we will go ahead and move on to item number 3, which is the director's report. Jose.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman. I am here to present the Executive Director's report on behalf of Hassan. So this morning I'll be covering progress on the Regional Transportation Plan, the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, Central Mobility Hub, the Midcoast Trolley, and conclude with the Del Mar Bluff stabilization. So I know that there's a lot of items on your agenda today, so we'll keep it short. By the way, welcome to the new fiscal year. As you know, the Board of Directors approved our final budget last month, and you have already heard the highlights from our budget team. We're looking forward to pushing forward on our 5 priority projects, and I'll give you a brief idea of where we stand on those today. So on the regional plan is on schedule, and the draft will be ready April 2021, with the board set to consider it the following fall. We expect to present the vision for our regional plan to a joint transportation, regional planning, and borders committee meeting on August 7th, followed a week later to the Board of Directors on August 14th. And we're working on making this virtual experience as close to in person as possible. Moving on to the Otay Mesa East and the SR11 projects. The Otay Mesa East Port of Entry and the SR11 construction are making progress. We were fortunate to tour the area last month and got a firsthand look at all of the work that's taking place over at the border. It was really rewarding to see the flags erected on the ground that visually portray the boundaries of the new Port of Entry project. The government of Mexico recently published the bid to acquire the right-of-way for the Mesa de Otay 2, which will be the Port of Entry on the Mexican side of the border. This is great news, and it means a lot to Sandag as we continue to push with this great opportunity between our 2 countries. Construction work continues and is about 80 days ahead of schedule on the SR11 highway extension and the southbound State Route 125 connectors to eastbound SR11 and SR905. So all of this is great work in the border area. Moving on to the Central Mobility Hub, our work on the hub at the Navy's Nabor site continues to move forward. We are beginning to get our P3 consultants on board, and the Navy is continuing to finish up its environmental work on the 70-acre property. In Sacramento, the bill to streamline the environmental work for this project continues to move forward in the Senate, and I think over the next few months, you will be hearing about great progress. Moving on to the Midcoast Trolley project. The 11-mile extension of the trolley from Old Town to the University City area is getting to its final construction stage. Much of the guideway for what will be called the UC San Diego Blue Line trolley has been stripped of its falsework. The rail continues to be placed, and the stations are actually starting to look like stations now. So we are coordinating regularly with UC San Diego and MTS, and look forward to planning the opening party, which we expect to happen in late fall of next year. And moving on to the Delmar Bluffs and the Lausanne corridor. This weekend, the Delmar Bluff Stabilization Project, which is now underway, will be given a 48-hour period to work without trains on the track. So what this means is that the tracks will be closed for work, which is something pretty rare during the summer season due to high tourism. Due to the COVID-19, fewer trains are running, and large events like the San Diego County Fair, Comic-Con, and the Padres, they're not holding events. So we're taking advantage of this quieter time to boost construction or the construction timeline for both the Bluffs and the Midcoast Trolley. And we're also meeting weekly with our state and local partners to determine the best way forward to fund our next series of stabilization efforts and to determine how best to optimize the Lausanne corridor in general. So, Mr. Vice Chairman, this concludes my report, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Valencia. Before I bring it back to committee for questions, I forgot to ask if there was any public comment on this particular item. So, Essa, can you tell me, do we have any paper slips for this particular item?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Perfect. All right, are there any questions for staff or for on the director's report from the committee members? Well, I had an oddly related one. I saw in the articles that were provided to us related to ITALC from staff, an article about straightening out the curve for Lausanne. I guess there was a settlement and there's some study work to be done. Are you familiar with that? Is that going to be Sandag work, or who's going to do that?
For a settlement of, what was that again? I didn't catch it.
The 2013 lawsuit between the Cleveland National Forest Foundation and I believe FHWA regarding widening the I-5 versus straightening out the curve for Amtrak or for the train, Lausanne. And the settlement was there somebody's going to do a study, and I was just wondering if that was going to be a Sandag study.
I see that Jim is on the line, so I'll hand it over to Jim.
Jim, welcome.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So as part of a settlement for the North Coast Corridor, Caltrans and the Cleveland National Forest Foundation came up with a settlement of which they did a study, and then a follow-up was going to be a project study report for straightening out the Miramar curve, basically getting rid of the Miramar curve, also known as Miramar Hill, just south of the Delmar Bluffs. And so Caltrans was going to start doing that. But we had a meeting with Caltrans and the Cleveland National Forest Foundation, and going on at the same time as Sandag is doing a study of the entire corridor. It says, what does this corridor, what should it look like in the future if we want it to be way faster and safer? Safer usually meaning getting the tracks off the bluffs, and also grade separations, because of all the coastal cities and how they've developed along the rail tracks, and the tracks are at grade there. And so Linda Culp, our project manager of that, is doing that study. So rather than have these two competing studies going on simultaneously, we're reaching an agreement with both Caltrans and the Cleveland National Forest Foundation to incorporate a lot of what Caltrans was required to do into the Sandag study of the entire corridor. In essence, the Caltrans study will be advanced as part of Linda's study, just like the study we did on the Bluffs about 4 years ago will be advanced as part of this new study. So we'll just have more information of which to then go out and compete for funds, and the board can prioritize what happens next and things like that. So it's very much a cooperative relationship now.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you, Jim. I thought it was odd that there was a new study. It was, Sandag had shared a lot of information about the potential for a project there with the committee over the years. So
yes. Yes.
All right, for my fellow committee members, anybody have questions for staff on this item? All right, well, hearing none, and as this is an information only item, we'll go ahead and receive and file the item, and thank staff for their presentation.
All right, thank you.
And we will go ahead And move on to the consent calendar. Are there any public speakers for item number 3? I'm sorry, the consent calendar itself?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Do not see any raised hands on item 4.
Okay, there are no raised hands. All right, good to know. Thank you. And if I cut over to my actual agenda. All right, so consent calendar has 4 items on it, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I don't see how we're going to do 7 on consent.
Vice Chair?
Yes.
For the consent has item number 4, only one item, the TransNet Senior Mini Grant Program Quarterly Update.
Oh, good.
That's
All right.
only,
So,
yeah, and it's an information item.
so for item number 4, are there any questions for staff from the committee members? All right.
Actually, sorry, I was waving. I don't know if my camera's working or not, but I just have one question, if I could.
Stuart?
Alpern, yeah. So this came up, I think it may go back over a year when we were talking about the issue of, I believe it was in Coronado, where the service provider was failing by our metrics. And the question came up as to whether the mini grant sort of contract itself was the best way of delivering services to the people. And I think at that time it was earmarked that there would be some review of the concept of using mini grants for service provision would be reviewed as part of a broader sort of strategic assessment. And I'm just sort of wondering if that question of, is this process of using these mini grants the best way to serve the public, if that question is in fact being reviewed or addressed somewhere. Thanks.
So,
Zachary, I think you might be muted, or.
yeah.
All right. So I think maybe you're referring to the specialized strategic plan for specialized transportation. That concluded, and there were a couple of recommendations, maybe better economies of scale. But for this quarterly update, there are only 2 grantees on the watch list, and one of them is only 1 month behind. So I don't think there's City of Oceanside has gotten an extension, and it has communicated to me that it will be able to finish the project within the allotted time with the extension. So this report is to notify the members of the progression, but I think that they will be able to complete the projects in the time frame that they're contractually obligated to complete them in.
Can I add,
Sorry, I probably should have preceded my question saying that I recognize that my question actually transcends the quarterly update, and maybe it actually should be part of a different discussion. But I was just curious as to what the resolution of that question was.
I would like to add, if possible, item number 11 on your agenda today is the Specialized Transportation Grant Program Call for Projects Evaluation Criteria. And my understanding is that some of the recommendations that came out of that strategic plan that Zachary was just referencing, that optimization plan, that staff would be addressing some of that as part of that presentation.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Other questions for staff in the committee? All right, hearing none, I will thank staff for the comment and or the reply to comments, and we'll receive and file that information item. And that concludes the consent calendar, and so we'll move on to reports. Item number 5. I believe is Ariana, is this a presentation by yourself?
Yeah.
I have to adjust my, I can't read.
Yeah. Yes, this is the update that we provide every month regarding your any actions that the Transportation Committee or the Board of Directors have taken on TransNet related items. And at its June meeting, the Transportation Committee approved the RTIP Amendment number 13, which you saw at your last meeting, and they received also the Regional Bikeway Program update, which is on your agenda today. And then in addition, I wanted to provide an update on the ITALC vacancy. So the closing date to submit applications was July 1st for the real estate and right-of-way category. And we received several applications. And the next step is for the technical screening committee to review those applications and recommend 2 candidates for consideration by the selection committee. So we are on track to have your new member seated at your September meeting. And then as a reminder, your 2020 ITALC annual report, that is scheduled for presentation this Friday at the board meeting, and Vice Chair Michael Kenny will be making that presentation. And then just a side note that in addition to former ITALC members, Kai Raymer and Greg Sadowski will be recognized for their service on the ITALC this Friday by Board Chair Steve Voss and the Sandag Board as well. With that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Ariana. Any questions from the committee? All right, well, hearing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 6.
Vice Chair Kenny,
Yes.
I would like to state for the record that there were no public comments or raised hands on item 5.
One demerit awarded. All right, I won't make that mistake again. So say on those same lines for item number 6, do we have any public speakers?
We do not at this time, but I will let you know if we have any after the presentation.
Okay, point of order. So if we have public speakers for item number 6, now is there opportunity to speak? So we'll, after the presentation, we'll hear public speakers?
Yes, sir.
All right, fair enough. All right, so it's the annual selection of the chair and the vice chair. Julie? Julie, you might be muted. There we go.
Yes, there we are. Sorry, my computer was having a little issue. So good morning. Yes, and as you said, it is time for a change in leadership. So at the beginning of each fiscal year, the ITALC is asked to select a new chair and vice chair to serve a 12-month term. Duties of the chair include running ITALC meetings, working with staff to set meeting agendas, and serving as the primary spokesperson for the ITALC to the board of directors, the transportation committee, other groups and organizations in the media. These duties become the duties of the vice chair, as is the case now, when the chair is unavailable. So with that, we'd like to ask the ITALC today to appoint a new chair and vice chair for fiscal year 21.
Thank you, Julie. Any questions for Julie? Okay, discussion amongst committee members? And I guess back to my original point of order, is now the opportunity to solicit discussion before committee discussion from the audience or from the general public, or after we discuss
it? I'm sorry, thank you, it's Tessa again. It would be appropriate to ask for public comments at this time, Vice Chair.
Okay.
And I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time.
Thank you. I will make a note that that is the opportunity to ask for public speaking. All right, so back to discussion amongst committee members. Do we have any volunteers for either position? Let's start with the vice chair. Let's do that.
Oh, I was going to actually start with the chair, but I was going to move to appoint Michael Kenny as the chair for the committee.
I'll second that motion. Halpern, second.
We have a motion and a second for the chair. Do we take this as one motion for both positions, or are we going to do it for twice? I guess that's for Tessa.
This is Amberlynn Griffin, legal counsel. The committee has the option to do both. I think that perhaps the better option might be to take them one at a time, so that in the event one candidate would be freed up for the next position.
Fair enough. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? I'm happy to accept the nomination. Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, Tessa, if you could call for a vote on the motion.
Thank you. On item 6, a motion to appoint Kenny as chair, licensed civil traffic engineer, Vice Chair Kenny.
Approved.
Construction contractor is absent. Biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Approve.
Finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Approve.
Licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Approve. And thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
You'll get your check.
Sector, Sunny House.
Approved.
That motion passes unanimously with those members present.
All right, so thank you for that. On the issue of the vice chair, do we have any discussion from the committee members on the vice chair?
I'm interested in throwing my hat in, my name in the hat if no one else is interested, so.
Well, thank you very much, Sunny. Do we have any other takers? Anybody else would like to be considered for the vice chair? All right. Hearing none, do we want to entertain a motion?
Dustin is on.
Oh, Dustin, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to make a motion to
Thank you, sir.
move Sunny House as vice chair of the ITAC.
Thank you, Dustin.
Do we have a second?
I would second that. This is Les.
Thank you, Les. All right, any discussion on the motion? Thank you very much, Sunny. Hearing none, Tessa, can you call for the vote, please?
Thank you, Vice Chair. On the item 6, the motion for appointing Vice Chair to the Vice Chair position, Sunny House. Licensed civil traffic engineer, Vice Chair Kenny.
Approved.
Contractor construction is absent. Biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Approve.
Finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Approve.
Licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Approve.
CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Yes, I approve myself.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously with those members.
All right, so thanks again, Sunny. That's kind of you. We're going to be the beneficiaries of your hard work. So with that, we'll conclude item number 6 and move on to item number 7. It's a discussion item, comprehensive multimodal corridor plan presentation by Mr. Chavez. Mr. Chavez, are you available?
I'm here.
All right, good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Can we get the presentation up, please? There we go. So this is an update on the status of the comprehensive multimodal corridor plans. Next slide, please. A little bit of background. Back in July of 2019, the Board of Directors approved the direction for updating the regional plan, of course, meeting all federal and state laws, but also implementing the 5 big moves, which is, I think ITAC has discussed the 5 big moves a little bit, kind of a new way of looking at the regional plan and kind of a real big overhaul of the regional plan moving forward. But also including prioritization of corridors that have been in the works for some time, State Route 78, 52, 67, the 94, 125, but also using the complete corridors model, which I'll get into in a little bit. Then in September of 2019, the board approved and allocated $40 million for updating of the corridor plans or development of comprehensive multimodal corridor plans over the next 5 years on 12 corridors throughout the San Diego region. Next slide. So what are comprehensive multimodal corridor plans? It's an integrated multimodal approach to corridor planning, of course, aligned with state and federal goals, detailing the complete corridors included in the regional plan, And the CMCPs, or the corridor plans, are also required by the California Transportation Commission in order to compete for upcoming State Bill 1 funding opportunities. They're also going to help us align priorities on the corridors and be competitive for other state, federal, and other local funding sources. Next slide. An example of past corridor plans that we've done in the past, of course, the I-5 North Coast Corridor, a very multimodal approach with not only the freeway improvements, but improvements of the coastal rail corridor and the coastal bike and rail corridor, coastal bikeway corridor, as well as the local street and road connections that bring everything together. Next slide. This is a slide that we're using a lot to explain the big 5 moves, kind of starting from left to right, an integrated multimodal corridor approach, starting off with freight and goods movement, bus rapid transit movement on our freeway corridors, of course, auto travel on the freeway corridors, rail transit and our rail goods movement corridors, and then the local street and road components with the bikeway pedestrian applications, and bringing technology in as an overarching application for all the corridor improvements. Next slide. So this is a 5-year program. The initial phase includes updating 5 of the corridor plans, 5 out of the 12. The phase 1 corridors are the Purple Line, Interstate 805 corridor, Blue Line I-5 South corridor, high-speed transit, State Route 52, State Route 67, the Sprinter, Palomar Airport Road, State Route 78 corridor, North County, and the Central Mobility Hub and connections to and from the Central Mobility Hub. Next slide. So some of the progress that we've made to date, we held a workshop with our partners at Caltrans District 11, getting the work plans in place, getting the teams in place, defining the geographical areas for each of the corridors, also developing issues and opportunity statements for each of the corridors, which is in your agenda package. We would very much appreciate any ITALK comments on those issues and opportunity statements. Next slide. So this exhibit shows the definition of the geographical areas for each of the corridor studies. I'd like to point out that we're recommending the combination of the Purple Line, 805, Blue Line, I-5 South corridor, which we're going to be calling the San Isidro to Serrano corridor. A lot of overlap between the I-5 and I-805, Blue Line, Purple Line on that corridor. So it makes a lot of sense to combine those 2 studies into one. We're also recommending that we split the State Route 52 and State Route 67 corridors into 2 separate study areas. A lot of differences between those corridor areas. One's very rural, State Route 67, very rural corridor, State Route 52, much more urban corridor. Shown in blue, the North County corridor covering State Route 78, and then shown in yellow, the Central Mobility Hub geographical study area. Next slide. So if you look at all of the policy guidance that comes from California Transportation Commission, Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration, you can kind of boil it into these 12 categories. And this is important for all the teams to develop an understanding for what are the appropriate transportation solutions for each corridor. So they'll be using these 12 policy considerations to develop the solutions that are tailored for each corridor. Next slide. This is my last slide. This kind of gives an overview of the process moving forward. We're planning check-ins starting this summer and fall to present the results of the data analysis and the stakeholder engagement. Moving into fall and winter 2021-2022, we'll be getting out to the public, having the community outreach sessions for the corridor plan updates, and then moving into spring and summer of 2021, presenting the draft and final updates to the corridor plans for each of those 5 initial corridors. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chavez, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Before we take it up to the committee for discussion, do we have any public speakers? Tessa? Any members of the public wish to speak on this issue?
I do not see any raised hands at this time, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. So we'll take questions for staff from committee members. Any questions? Ms. House?
I have a question for Richard about the policy consideration criteria. Are these just in random, or are these in order of priority, or how do you evaluate what's the most important?
Yeah, great question. And if we could go back to that slide, please. So, you know, these 12 policy considerations, they're all important, right? And, you know, it's very hard to say any one of them is more important than the others. But what this does is it develops a framework for, you know, what's important for all corridors. And it gives the teams the ability to develop the performance metrics. So they'll be using data and data analysis around these 12 policy considerations to develop the performance metrics for what performs best, what are the best transportation solutions for those corridors. Of course, then combining that in with the stakeholder and community outreach component to try to come up with those prioritized solutions for each corridor, which is very, very powerful. You know, you think about competing for state, federal, and if we're ever going to go after another local sales tax measure, having consensus around what those priorities are in each corridor is very powerful.
That was my next question. Have you used this performance metrics process for previous corridors? You mentioned the I-5 before.
Yeah, so, you know, we've got gobs and gobs of data that we have available to us, working with our data analysis and modeling folks, both at Sandag, at Caltrans, and the cities, especially the city of San Diego, how we apply that data to develop the performance metrics on what are the appropriate solutions, again, for each quarter. What's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck?
Okay, so those metrics have already been established, or are you still developing those?
We're still developing those. So each of the teams and at the program level, we're developing those performance metrics. And we have a lot of work done in the past. You know, we've been updating the regional plan for a long time now. We always use performance metrics with that regional plan update. So building on the work that's been done in the past as well.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
All right, other questions from the committee member? Yes.
Yeah, I just had one. Richard, thanks for the presentation. I was just curious, is there a team that you're working with at District 11 in conjunction with the Sandag team?
Yes, we've got quite an extensive organizational chart and having the core teams for each of the 5 corridors, as well as subject matter experts from both Sandag, Caltrans, and the cities. You know, as the corridor geographical areas cover a lot of the local jurisdictions, the cities and the county, we have representatives from those folks as well on the teams. And then again, City of San Diego, they have a very, you know, pretty sophisticated operation there. They're providing quite a few subject matter experts to the effort as well.
Well, it sounds like quite an endeavor. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Okay, so no more questions for staff. Discussion? So it's, Richard, answer or help me understand this. So this is an item that would next go to the Transportation Commission. Is that the general? So as a discussion item, and make a recommendation to support this and or recommend it to the Transportation Commission, or we could choose not to make a motion at all. Is there any thoughts among the committee members to whether or not we would want to do that? Recommend this to the Transportation Commission?
Just to chime in a little bit, this is an informational update. We're very open and would be happy to receive comments from the ITAC committee, especially on refinements to those 12 policy considerations or refinements to the issues and opportunity statements. And this will be presented to Transportation Committee later this fall. We'll be presenting this to the full board, Sandag Board of Directors this Friday. And then moving forward into next year, we will have to submit these updated quarter plans to the California Transportation Commission to be eligible to compete for Senate Bill 1 funding.
What date is that meeting?
With the California Transportation Commission, that meeting date has not been set, but we're expecting that to be in the fall of 2021.
All right. Well, thank you again for your presentation. We'll go ahead and receive this and look forward to updates in the future. With that, you bet. Have a good day, Richard. With that, we'll move on to item number 8. This is a presentation on the proposed TransNet agreed upon procedures. And I believe we have a presentation by Yen Ho.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman. At the May ITAC meeting, the 2020 fiscal year 2020 compliance audit subcommittee was chosen, and that included Stuart Halpern, Michael McKinney, and Tracy Drager. Subsequent to that meeting, the proposed AUP were provided to the subcommittee by the auditors for review and comment. All members of the subcommittee are in agreement with the proposed AUP being presented today. Jennifer Farr will now take you through the agreed upon procedures. After Jennifer completes her presentation, I will present today's recommendation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, and good morning, committee members. Last month, ITAC approved the final fiscal year 2019 TransNet agreed upon procedures, and we are in the planning stages for the fiscal year 2020 agreed upon procedures, and we're seeking your approval for those procedures today. As you may recall, last year for the fiscal year 2019 procedures, we made some substantive changes to those procedures, including adding a specific test of payroll if salaries exceeded 20% of the total expenditures, and expanding our testing of indirect cost by adding a standard questionnaire. This year, our proposed approach is very similar to last year's approach. We've only made 2 changes to the procedures this year. One of them is obviously to modify all of the dates and all of the reports to align with the fiscal year end June 30, 2020. And then the second is a minor change to the cities and counties procedures, and it's related to procedure number 13C8, related to the RTCIP funding program. The change we made this year was to clarify the term fund administration to include additional information that our auditors believe the term fund administration should include indirect cost. Although fund administration is not defined by the ordinance, this is the way we have interpreted fund administration in the past. And it's brought up some confusion and questions for our auditors and for the agencies about what fund administration means. So it makes sense to us that indirect cost would be the cost of administering the program, and we have always looked at it that way and done the calculation to include indirect cost in fund administration. So our only recommended change to that procedure is simply to add the word indirect cost to make it a little more clear what we're looking at with that procedure. As Yen mentioned, the ITAC Fiscal and Compliance Audit Subcommittee received the draft procedures for review on June 17th, and they provided some questions and additional discussion, which the group discussed. As a result of that discussion, there were no additional changes to the procedures, and I'm not sure if any of the ITAC Fiscal and Compliance Audit Subcommittee members want to talk about some of those discussion items. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Yen, and then maybe we can open it up to see if there's additional questions.
So now I'm going to ask the ITAC to approve the proposed AUP for the fiscal year 2020 audits.
Again, thank you very much. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair Kinney. I do not see any raised hands at this time.
All right, let's take it back to the committee members for questions for the presenters. Do we have any questions for Yen or Jennifer?
This is Stuart Halpern. I would move to approve.
Motion, do we have a second?
I second.
House seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Tessa, if you could call for the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair Kinney. On item number 8, licensed civil traffic engineer, Chair Kinney. I'm sorry you cut out, sir.
Approve.
Thank you. Contractor construction is absent. Biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Approve.
Finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Approve.
Licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Approve.
CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Approved.
That item passes unanimously with those members present. Thank you.
All right, so thanks, staff, for the presentation. And with that, we will move on to item 9. Get my notes in front of me. Hang on a minute here. So this is a presentation from Ms. Cope on the Memorandum of Understanding with North County Transit District. Is that correct?
Yes, this is Dawn Batiste. I'm going to begin the presentation, and then I will turn it over to Linda.
Thank you, Dawn. Welcome.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to do a general overview of items 9A and B at one time, and then we can have Linda discuss the North County Transit District item. And then Eric Minisili from City of Imperial Beach will discuss the project proposed in 9B. So again, I'm Dawn Batiste. I'm a financial programming manager with Sandag. And as you're aware, Sandag has a debt program. It includes bonds and commercial paper. And today we have 2 requests for discussion related to the use of the commercial paper program. The first is the North County Transit District is asking to borrow up to $46 million for its coaster capacity expansion project. And then the City of Imperial Beach in item 9B is asking to borrow $600,000 for its traffic light synchronization project. So I'm going to go ahead and describe the overall process that we go through with these requests, and then you'll hear from the presenters on the projects. So when we receive these requests from the local jurisdictions, we go through a review process that is several steps and can take a little bit of time. But we start with a capacity analysis. And this is just to determine if there will be enough sales tax coming in to cover the repayment over the time frame requested. Attachment 3 of each of these reports includes the capacity analysis. And the commercial paper is a variable rate debt. So the agencies are asked to cover the rate at the time the funds are used and some fees associated with the borrowing. So we use in the capacity analysis a 2.5% interest rate. And this rate has generally been a bit higher than the fees plus interest has averaged in the past. And we do this just to be sure that the capacity exists, in the event of any revenue downturn or interest cost increase. So once we determine there's a repayment capacity, we move on to looking more at the project and the requirements. Attachment 2 of each of the reports discusses these requirements, and we just want to make sure the project itself is going to qualify. So the questions that we ask include, Is it a congestion relief project? Is it a capital project? And is the useful life longer than the repayment period? And then is the local jurisdiction in agreement on the repayment terms? So then we want to make sure that we maintain our tax exempt status. So we do have bond counsel and Sandag counsel review. And then next we go back to the agency and we ask that they obtain their council or board approval before we come here today with a request for you. And so attachment 4 of each of the reports includes the board resolutions and council resolutions. So that brings us to this point today where ITALC within the ordinance is required to review any proposed debt financings to ensure benefits of proposed financing in accelerating delivery, avoiding future cost escalation and other related factors exceed the issuance and interest cost. And the term benefits doesn't necessarily just mean the economic benefit, which of course would mean the cost of borrowing would be less than the cost of the project if they waited until the TransNet funding was all collected and available for PAYGO. But it can also include other benefits such as community benefits. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Linda to discuss the NCTD project.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dawn. And thank you, members of the committee. So just by way of some background in terms of item 9A is that since 1995, NCTD has operated the Coaster or Coast Express Rail service between Oceanside and downtown San Diego, including 8 stops along the way. The Coaster service is part of the major corridor program in TransNet, and there's 2 components. There's a capital component and an operations component. And on the capital side, that entails adding a second track so that trains don't have to wait on each other. They can pass on these additional track capacity, station improvements such as parking improvements, and then vehicle procurement. On the service side, the plan is to add both additional peak periods, so morning and afternoon peak period service, as well as midday or later at night service. So those are both components of TransNet. Just by way of background on the capital program, that over the last 10 to 12 years, Sandag has funded, designed, and constructed more than 12 miles of double track along the corridor. So right now, about 70% of the San Diego section of the Low Sand corridor is double track, and we're set to open a couple more miles in a couple of months. And that it's all around the ultimate goal of being able to add more passenger and more freight service in order to keep up with both current and future demand for the service. So in part, due to these improvements, we also have Amtrak Pacific Surfliner service, and Amtrak recently has been able to add 2 more round trips between San Diego and LA. That's also an important service, and it just kind of goes to the point that the corridor is shared amongst passenger and freight. So last September, the board of directors approved $58.8 million to add or to procure 2 new train sets for coaster service. And that includes 2 locomotives, cab cars, and then a number of coach or passenger cars. And that's needed in order to add that additional service bump between Oceanside and downtown San Diego. Now, these funds are programmed beginning in fiscal year 2024. And NCTD plans with this new equipment to increase the service to 30 minutes, every 30 minutes a train in the peak period, both inbound and outbound during the morning and afternoon commute period, as well as additional midday service. Per the Memorandum of Agreement, the service increases are anticipated to begin either in October of 2022 or April of 2023. Those are there's scheduled service changes twice a year, October or April. And really that date, which date is picked, depends on the delivery, the testing, and the acceptance of the new train equipment. So right now, NCTD has existing procurements for both locomotives and cars, and their options for these additional 2 train sets. So that's the timing challenge here, is in order to take advantage of those procurements, NCTD needs to advance the payments prior to fiscal year 2024. So with that overview, I will pass it on to either Eric or Dawn.
You know, Chair Kenny, I will ask you if you have a preference to take comments or questions in between these parts A and B, or if you would prefer to hear the Part B project presentation and then discuss the mode.
Thank you for the opportunity. That's something that I get point of order for council. In the smaller job, the IB job, they mentioned a very specific type of software that my company would sell to IB. So generally this doesn't happen. Usually we talk about very broad funding issues like NCC is a big number, but I think I have to recuse myself. Any thoughts on that? Am I understanding that correctly?
Chair Kenny, this is Amberlynn Griffin Sandag, legal counsel, and I apologize, your audio is cutting out a little bit, but from what I can gather, it sounds like you may feel as though you have a potential conflict of interest with regard to item 9B. These items are not are discussion items only, so no vote would be taken. Certainly, if you feel as though there is a potential conflict regarding some of your own personal business ventures, then you are free to state the conflict on the record and abstain from any discussion on that item.
All right, for the record, the mention of a traffic operations center procurement for IB would be something that my company would probably participate in. So I won't be participating in any discussion on item 9B. But I think we ought to have a discussion on 9A first, and then my colleagues could move forward with 9B. So with that, for committee members, do you have any questions for the presentation we just heard on 9A?
This is Stuart. I actually have a question that I think really relates to both items, but going back to Dawn, as part of your introduction to the item, you referenced that part of the analysis was I guess a capacity analysis. I just want to clarify, in your reference to that, are you referring to the capacity of the borrower or to pay back the program? Or are you talking about the capacity of the program itself and Sandag's potential alternative needs for drawing down on the commercial paper program?
Yeah, so the capacity analysis relates to the borrower's ability through its share of the TransNet funds to pay the debt. So it is, for example, for Imperial Beach, the debt service would be covered by their local street improvement funds that they receive through Sandag with the TransNet dollars. So we do the capacity analysis to see that those funds are adequate and the projected income is adequate at the proposed rate to cover the debt service costs. And within CTD, the interest would be borne by their transit system improvement funds that they also receive through TransNet dollars. So it's not the larger program, it's a subcomponent that we are looking at to make sure that those revenues will be adequate.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification. So I guess then my follow-on question would be, recognizing that I think it's stated in the materials that after both of these drawdowns, there would only be 20-something million left of the 100. Is part of the review also the question of, hey, what else might be out there that we might need to draw down on? And is the rule of thumb here, whoever asks first gets it? Or is there a view that, we wouldn't have a problem expanding beyond the 100 million of the program if we needed to? Which relates to, I guess, then a third question is the 100 million a sort of a board mandated limitation, so that if there were a need to go beyond the 100 million for any reason on a relatively short notice, that we have the capacity to do so?
Yeah, Andre's on the line now, so he may be able to address this one.
Yeah, thank you for the question, committee member Stuart Halpern. So currently we do have a $100 million capacity with Bank of America, which we procured about 1.5 years ago. And we have a commitment from them that we could increase the capacity by an additional $50 million today if we wanted to. The reason why we wouldn't do that at this point is because obviously we're charged approximately 35 basis points on an annual basis for the line, whether we use it or not. So we do have the additional capacity. We watch the capacity pretty closely. And so even if we're to get to, the full capacity amount, we know that we have an additional 50% over at this point that has been approved by the bank. So we feel fairly comfortable, even if these two are approved by the board, that we still have additional capacity outside the actual amount that we have outstanding today.
Great, thank you very much. That directly addresses the point I was curious about. Thanks.
House, some questions for staff?
Okay, first question I have is in attachment A, you showed this is for NCTD, you showed the coaster service expansion. Now I know this has been in the works for a while, but with what's happening in the world now and maybe changes in travel patterns and maybe more people working from home or telecommuting, how does that impact really the service and the ridership? Has that been taken into consideration?
Yes, so this is Linda Culp. I'm not sure if NCPD would want to address that, but yes, that's definitely been a concern since everyone's been working from home and ridership has been lower. Both of our passenger services, or all three really, have decreased the number of trips that are offered. There's been some federal assistance in terms of operating assistance and the CARES Act that they've been able to apply, but I think all of the operators right now are dealing with that. I know that aside from that, NCTD does have some additional plans to look at potential off-peak service as early as next spring. So I think a lot is in flux right now because of the points that you raised. But as of now, in order to plan for these service increases that would happen in 22, 23, we still see a need for the additional equipment.
I guess that still doesn't make me feel comfortable. This is a big investment we're doing and we're expecting them to repay. It kind of ties to my second question on in attachment 3. Looks like the principal is being paid from other funding sources, item number 4 or note number 4. Maybe can you explain what those sources of funds are? And again, if it's coming from revenue or other types of services, are we sure that those funds will be available to repay the debt?
So this is Dawn again, and I just want to, so this particular project was approved back in September by the Board of Directors to be funded with regional funds, but not until 2024 and 2025. So as the principal payments are made later, funds will come in. This was funded by, I believe, TransNet, local partnership program funds, and CMAQ funds. So the local partnership program funds have been secured and allocated by the commission. And then as additional funds come in 2024 and 2025, they would help pay down the principal. Part of those funds are CMAQ dollars, and part are, again, TransNet dollars. So what now we are anticipating is that, all the forecasts show that there is capacity to pay that principal when the time comes to pay down the principal. All of these projects, by the way, in the commercial paper program, if there is a bond issuance, have an opportunity to convert into a long-term bond debt, should we need to do that.
Okay. So if ridership does not go to the level that's been expected or projected, the repayment is still not in jeopardy. It can be covered.
Right, the repayment is not based on their fare box or any other revenues that they will be receiving for operating the service.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I just weigh in on that? Sunny, it sounds like you were also asking, given where we are now and the future of telecommuting, because we're all finding this a lot more successful than I think any of us did, is this a wise long-term investment? Regardless of this, the basic fact is they have to be able to pay back. And so it sounds like we have good confidence in that. Is this a wise investment? Just a reminder, this is still the second busiest intercity rail corridor in America. The region has made a long-term investment that says, hey, we need to find a way to get from LA to San Diego a lot faster and a lot more reliably. And part of the problem that people have is the service is not frequent enough that it's reliable. They can't take it when they need to take it. And so the more service you add, then that should build the ridership. Now, none of us can predict the future, but I think the consensus regionally is that this is still a wise long-term investment, regardless of what's happened over the past 3 months and then a little bit before that with the reduction in ridership overall in transit during the the peak of the good times prior to the recession.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for answering my questions. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so
Actually, this is Stuart Halpern. I just have one other, it's sort of a question, maybe it's a point, but so if I'm understanding, I think it was Linda, who just explained this to respond to Sunny's question, so that if in effect the repayment of the commercial paper borrowing is actually not so dependent on the operating performance and the revenues generated through NCGD, I guess I would just say, this by way of feedback, if I'm understanding that correctly, it would have been helpful to have clarified that in the memo introducing the item. Because, I think Sunny raised a really good point. When you're thinking about the repayment capacity and you look at the operating statistics, her question is dead on target. But if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying, well, we're not really relying on the operating performance to do the repayment. This is in effect sort of like a pre-funding of already committed funds. And maybe I just didn't see it in the memo itself, but that to me would have been a material item to have included up front in the memo.
okay, thank you for that feedback. I do want to make sure, just to clarify, that there are two separate TransNet pots of funds. Essentially, we have the transit system improvement funds, and then we have the new operations funding, which is actually its own share of the TransNet funds that are received. So the TSI funds are allocated annually. The other funds are allocated for specific to operations, and are not funds that we consider typically when we run any capacity analysis, because those would be dependent upon the new services and the operation of those services. But we will work to clarify the nature of the repayment of the principal.
Other committee members have questions for 9A? In fairness to the general public, can you distinguish any public speakers between 9A and 9B?
Thank you, Chair Kinney. I do not see any hands raised for item 9A.
All right, with that, I have to move on to item 9B. And thank you very much for the presentation and the discussion.
All right, so now we have Eric Minisili from the City of Imperial Beach, and he'll be discussing their traffic light synchronization project.
Good morning, honorable members of the committee. My name is Eric Minichilli. I'm the Director of Public Works in Imperial Beach. We've got an exciting project that is time sensitive, so I'll try to be brief, but here we go. So as you may be aware, SR 75 is the primary corridor in Imperial Beach. It's Palm Avenue, and it runs it reaches, it's a primary access for 4 military installations in Coronado and in Imperial Beach. Recently, Caltrans relinquishment to San Diego, Imperial Beach, and Coronado of their respective portions of the roadway has opened up an opportunity to these agencies. And the SANDAG program budget in 24 and 25 put forward a couple $1 million toward what they called Palm Avenue, the SR 75 Palm Avenue operational improvements to design and construction. And the issue has been long-standing here is, with all that naval traffic, commuter traffic, that corridor is extremely congested, especially in Imperial Beach and our neighbors to the west, neighbors to the east, San Diego, as people exit I-5 and head into Imperial Beach to get to Coronado or to the bases in Imperial Beach. And it's long been considered an opportunity for some traffic signals, synchronization and that kind of thing. So the dollars were available out in 24 and 25. The issue that's occurred is that we have an excellent opportunity to address this much sooner. As part of the construction of the naval base, the coastal campus on the border of Imperial Beach there in Coronado, SDG&E is required to do a bunch of upgrades to their circuit in Palm Avenue, and Imperial Beach took it upon itself to negotiate with SDG&E to install basically empty conduits in the ground that would one day be able to be used to put in the fiber optic cabling that would enable us to fully synchronize that corridor well in advance. The issue is SDG&E is going to be starting their project in September. We in Imperial Beach have agreed to utilize commercial paper funding to push the money forward so that we can get this work installed now versus waiting several years and having to do it on our own again and tearing up the road again in 24, 25, when we can take an opportunity now to do the bulk of the work that is required for that synchronization project. So I would like to commend SANDAG staff for being as nimble as they have been to find a solution financing wise for Imperial Beach so we can take advantage of this massive opportunity to push a project that is a regional need much more cheaply and more quickly than originally intended. So that's why we're here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Take it back to the committee. Are there any members of the committee that have questions for Eric on item 9B?
Mr. Chair, I just need some clarification on the funds. It says that there's 28.7 million out of 100 available. How does that relate to what we're giving to NCTD?
Yeah, this is Dawn. So these reports, as they were prepared, should have probably gone in a reverse order for A and B. So the calculations on this report were prepared first. So overall, for the 2 items, there was an amount available. So these 2 particular items take the amount up to the 100 million. Generally based on the draw. As Andre mentioned, we have room to increase the limit to 150, but at this time we don't see the need for that because of the draw schedules for the projects currently in the commercial paper program and for these 2 proposed projects. So essentially this 46 million and the 600,000 would take us over 100 million, but the draw schedules for them do not. So the draw schedules up until the commercial paper renewal in September 2021 allow for both of these projects to fit within the existing program.
But that would then completely, I guess, take out the 100 million capacity that was available.
Yes, if we just did the plain math, yes. But when we do the analysis, we look at the projects in the commercial paper program that are currently paying back principal and interest, which is freeing up capacity, as well as the draw for other projects that might be coming forward. So we would do a larger program, commercial paper program analysis. We should receive another request for use of commercial paper.
Okay, and at this time, are you considering any other requests?
Andre or Sam may know, but at this time, I'm not aware of any other commercial paper requests that's been submitted.
Andre, you're on.
Yeah, no, as Dawn mentioned, at this point, we don't have requests. Typically, SANDAG, before we issue bonds, we use commercial paper, but our plan of finance right now shows that we're not going to be borrowing anything long-term, probably for the next 3 or 4 years. So even we at SANDAG don't have a requirement to draw on the commercial paper at this point.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions for staff from the it appears I'm in and out. Can I?
Yeah, we are having some trouble hearing you, Chair Kenny. I'm wondering if it might make sense, I'm looking to production, for him to dial in. I don't know if he's on still. It looks like his name is still listed, so.
I'm still here. I think if I cut out,
Maybe
I'll have it for the audio.
Yeah, the audio only might be a better option. It seems like the camera might be causing some communication issues, but if necessary, you also have the option of dialing in, is my understanding, and that might help the connectivity issues.
Ariana, this is Arthur with production. One thing to save bandwidth is when people are not talking, to have them off camera.
Phone number.
Yes, I think that's what we were just mentioning.
Chair Kenny, I see your audio is back on.
Yeah.
Okay, does he have the phone number that he should use to dial in?
Chair Kenny, you can go to your audio panel, open that up, and then switch from computer audio to phone call, and it will give you the dial-in number.
Is there a way for us to just tell him what the number is?
I think he's currently doing that, Ariana.
Oh, okay, you have visibility.
He has to get the number specific to him once he clicks the phone call button.
Understood. Thank you.
Amberlynn, this is Tessa. Would it be appropriate for our vice chair, our newly elected vice chair, Sunny House, to continue and perhaps ask if there's any public comments on 9B?
This is Amberlyn, Sandag Legal Counsel. Yes, if the newly appointed vice chair was willing to temporarily take over the meeting, we could certainly help her guide through the remaining items that are left until the chair rejoins the meeting.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
That didn't take too long. Are there any public comments on this particular item?
Thank you, Vice Chair House. I do not see any raised hands on 9B at this time.
Okay. So if no comments, this was a discussion item, so it can be basic. We can move on to the next item, item 10, which is the Regional Transportation Improvement Amendment number 14. Hi, Richard.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Okay, so thank you, Vice Chair, and good morning, members of the ITAC. I'm here today with the draft of Amendment number 14 to the 2018 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. And let me just begin by saying that I know this item covers a lot of pages in today's agenda, but this RTIP amendment is an unusual one. Generally, amendments are not so large. Usually the updates to the RTIP version are about this size. This amendment includes some new projects as well as the TransNet program of projects, which is usually updated when we update the RTIP. Also, we are open to suggestions as to how we can make this information a little more digestible for you guys. So any feedback is definitely welcomed. Now, to provide a little context to this amendment for our new ITAC members, the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP, is the 5-year program of projects that implements the projects in the regional plan. Normally, we update this program every 2 years. Updating requires that we evaluate the air quality impacts of the program. In February, we informed the ITAC that because of a ruling by the EPA, we would not be able to use our air quality model, so the state canceled the scheduled update. However, the TransNet Extension Ordinance requires that Sandag prepare an update to the TransNet Program of Projects, or POP, which is programmed in the RTIP every 2 years. Therefore, to comply with the ordinance, we asked local agencies to update their program of projects for fiscal years 21 through 25 and to program it as an amendment to the existing 2018 RTIP. Amendment 14 reflects the programming of the 2020 TransNet program of projects, as well as the addition of some new projects, and also the fiscal year 2021 Sandag program budget. The ITAC is asked to review and discuss the projects in the proposed amendment, focusing their review on the TransNet funded projects. Attachment 1 on page 72 of the agenda is the draft 2020 TransNet program of projects. Each agency has held a public hearing and has submitted a resolution. National City held their hearing before the revenue was revised in April and are scheduled to go back to council with the revised revenue and POP on August 4th. This attachment is provided to illustrate all 5 years of the program of projects. This attachment is necessary because we are programming this program of projects as an amendment to the 2018 RTIP rather than an RTIP update, and the current RTIP will only show the programming of the first 3 years, which are fiscal years 21 through 23. Attachment 2 on page 125 of the agenda is the summary of changes report showing the prior and revised project cost, the cost difference, and the percent change in each project. This report is sorted alphabetically by agency. Some of the changes included in this amendment, as I mentioned, are the 2020 TransNet program of projects, the programming of 13 new local projects, and the programming of the fiscal year 2021 Sandag program budget. Also, please note that this report, the summary of changes report, was developed based on the way that other MPOs developed theirs. And also, this amendment has the projects sorted by city, so it would be easier for you to tie them to the various projects in the POP spreadsheets in attachment 1. This report is normally sorted by the absolute value of the change, beginning with the largest change in dollars. In attachment 3, beginning on page 145 of the agenda, you'll find the new projects proposed in this amendment, specifically those funded with TransNet. For this amendment, and in order to reflect the 2 additional years of the 2020 TransNet program of projects, we've added a column to the table for future years funding. There are some projects that have been added which only have funding in future years, and these projects are currently listed for information only. Attachment 3A, beginning on page 157, is all the proposed changes that are included in this amendment. And finally, attachment 4 presents the eligibility analysis for projects included in the program of projects. Staff considers that all projects submitted for TransNet funds are eligible. The Transportation Committee will be asked to release this draft for public comment and schedule a public hearing at their September 4th Transportation Committee meeting. The ITAC will have an opportunity to review the final version of this amendment at its September meeting. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Richard. Tessa, are there any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do not see any raised hands at this time.
Okay, so we will open it up to the committee members. Are there any questions, comments on what Richard presented? Anyone?
Hi, this is Stuart Halpern. Just a couple of comments. One, with all respect to the item, I'm wondering, Ariana, Julie, whomever, just in terms of the package itself, I'm wondering if when we get, and it's typically the RTIP related items that are really, really long like this, if we could just put those as the last item in the package, because frankly, I often will only get through the first 250 pages or so of RTIP items. And then whatever comes after that, I have a hard time finding, and maybe I need to learn how to tab through the materials. But I would just say, even if for the meeting, we need to take them earlier in the agenda, maybe if we could just, in terms of the package management, that would be a helpful thing to me. And then Richard, I appreciate your kind offer for feedback on that. He's a little bit more user friendly. I guess I would say that, any attachments that are in any way summaries or have the notion of new items, I would actually just bring those things up front, because more often than not, at least for me, those are the things I would tend to focus on as I go through the materials. So that would be a helpful thing. Again, more package management than anything else.
Okay. Yeah, great feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Anyone else on the committee?
Sonny, it's Mike Kenny. I did manage to dial in.
Okay.
I apologize for throwing you into that straight away. No, 4 items removed.
I do have a question as well, but you can take over now.
Okay, so I take it did we finish item 9B and we've moved on to 10, the discussion about the RTIP? Is that where we're at?
That's correct.
Okay. So, Mr. Radcliffe, did you get an opportunity to present?
Yes, I did.
All right, thank you. So we've had some discussion from staff, or I'm sorry, from the committee. Do we have any other comments from the committee?
I do have a couple of questions.
All right, Ms. House?
First of all, I agree with Stuart. It's just a lot of information. And if there are any ways that we can maybe even have a separate package of just the additional attachments or something like that, that doesn't get into the main package, that might be helpful. I don't know if that's possible legally or not. And then the summary that you provided was great. I like the summary because it shows where it's going up or down, or different transfers. But there's no bottom line on the summary. Is like there's no summary of the summary basically to show what the total funds were and what the difference is. So if we could add that, that would be helpful. as well, to just see how the funds are changing? Or is that it? I'm assuming in the summary that you provided, the request for change is based on the difference between what was before and what's new. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay. Can you explain the $132 million change? This is the grouped project for rehabilitation and reconstruction of track structure. So can you explain what that is about?
Now connected to desktop L1J3QM3.
Can you tell me which, you said, sorry, what was the name of the group listing?
It is a grouped project for rehabilitation or reconstruction of track structures, track and track bed in existing right of way. And it's $132 million cost difference. And it's on page the 135 of the PDF of the package, or page 11 of 15 of the summary.
Sorry, I'm just trying to identify that specific project within that group listing.
Yeah, it was a $162 million program before. Now it's down to 30 million. So it's a big number. I just wanted to know why, or what's the story behind that one.
Oh, Sunny, this is Sue Albert.
Oh.
I'm wondering, is this the blue line?
It doesn't say what line, it just says group projects for rehabilitation or reconstruction of track structure, track and track in existing right of way. Oh, sorry, it is blue line corridor, yes.
Yeah, so summary of.
Okay, so the
SAM 66.
Right. So the reason for that reduction, Sunny, is that there were originally maybe 4 or 5 projects in that group listing, and slowly those projects are complete, and we've been closing them out. So there were the previous amendment were 2 projects, and one of them was completed and closed. So that was the reduction.
But if it's closed, hasn't the money been spent, or is it just not done?
Yes, the money's been spent, so that gets closed out of the RTIP, because the RTIP is a planning document for future funding.
Right. Okay. Okay.
I wanted to just also mention, while I'm speaking in response to Stuart's question and your question about simplifying the package, would you have preferred if the larger tables were just included as a link that you could reference? I think that would be.
Yes, I think that's additional information if needed. I got what I needed out of the summary page, and that was great. You know, and anything else I could go further by looking at the link.
All right.
Thank you.
So Ms. House, this is Chairman Kenny, and I thought you said you had 2 questions?
Yeah. I'm done. The first question was, or the first comment was about the summary, maybe getting it total at the bottom of that table, summary table. So.
Fair enough. So thank you. Any other committee members have questions for staff? I also believe I failed to call for any public comment. So Tessa, do you have any speaker slips on this item?
Thank you, Chair Kinney. Actually, the Vice Chair did call for public comments, and we do not have any.
Well done. Okay, good. So this is also a discussion item. We're able to take action, but we don't have to. We're not obligated to take any action. Is there a desire from the committee to make a motion? Okay, so hearing none, we'll thank staff for their report and move on to the next item. That would be item 11, I believe. I'm trying to find my agenda, make sure I'm not reading the last one here. Yeah, so item 11, Specialized Transportation Grant Program Call for Project Evaluation. Is Mr. Rivera ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Good morning, members of the committee. Today, I'm presenting proposed changes to the eligibility and evaluation criteria for the Cycle 11 Specialized Transportation Grant Program call for projects, which I hope will help to address the optimization of senior mini grant funds discussion as mentioned previously in item 4. We invite your discussion and input about this item and will provide your feedback to the Transportation Committee next week when we ask them to approve these changes. We can go to the next slide. So to provide context for the proposed changes to Cycle 11, I would like to begin by stating the program goal, objectives, eligibility criteria, and evaluation criteria approved for Cycle 10. The program goal is to, quote, improve mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities throughout the region by removing barriers to transportation services, expanding transportation mobility options, and providing transportation services that meet the special needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities. Staff does not propose any changes to this program goal or objectives on the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. There are also 4 program objectives. They strive to 1, fund projects that are derived from very high or high priority strategies outlined in the coordinated plan. 2, fund innovative and flexible programs. 3, provide incentives for the coordination among specialized transportation providers. And 4, encourage cost-efficient service provision through coordination, innovation, and the leveraging of matching funds. Next slide, please. So based on the program goal and objectives, the transportation approved these 8 evaluation criteria categories and relative point weights during the Cycle 10 call for projects. No adjustments to the evaluation criteria categories and points are proposed for the Cycle 11 call for projects. Next slide. However, staff are proposing a few modifications for Cycle 11. They are shown in attachment 2 of the staff report, and I will discuss in further detail today. In summary, staff proposes to 1, increase the maximum grant request amount both for projects and applicants. 2, update the performance indicator metrics used for operating projects. 3, modify the seat utilization rate as a performance indicator. And 4, alter the methodology used to calculate past performance adjustments. If we can go to the next slide. So for the eligibility criteria. In 2011, the Transportation Committee approved minimum and maximum grant request amounts for the Specialized Transportation Grant Program, which have not been modified since. For Cycle 11, staff proposes increasing the maximum total grant request per project from $200,000 to $250,000 per year per funding source. Staff also proposes increasing the maximum grant request per applying agency from $500,000 to $600,000 per year per funding source. These changes seek to both encourage, quote, bigger bang for the buck and reduce duplicative services. And as this was discussed in item 4. No other changes to the eligibility criteria are proposed. We can go to the next slide. Second, to reflect current trends in specialized transportation service delivery, staff proposes updating the cost per one-way passenger trip and cost per service hour performance indicators. Next slide, please. Third, due to COVID-19, staff proposes modifying the seat utilization rate performance indicator to allow for more flexibility. The proposed change seeks to balance the need for service delivery with the recognition that physical distancing requirements or recommendations may prohibit or hinder use of shared trips, especially for seniors and individuals with disabilities. Next slide, please. Lastly, staff proposes altering the methodology for calculating past performance adjustments so they tie more to the performance of individual projects by project type and more accurately measure a grantee's actual performance. Currently, if an applicant has held multiple specialized transportation grants from SANDAG in the past 3 years, staff calculates an average of the performance scores such that each applicant has one past performance adjustment applied to all proposed projects, irrespective of project type or level of funding. So for example, as shown on the screen, if an applicant performed 4 operating and 2 mobility management projects with varying costs, staff in prior cycles would provide 1 past performance adjustment, which staff would apply to the rankings of all proposed projects from the applicant. In this example, the 1 past performance adjustment is positive 0.67%. We can go to the next slide. However, with the proposed methodology for the upcoming cycle, the same applicant as in the prior example would receive 2 performance adjustments for each project type weighted by project cost. In this example, staff would apply a past performance adjustment of negative 0.4% to the applicant's proposed operating projects and a positive 1.5% to the applicant's proposed mobility management projects. If we could go to the next slide. And lastly, to not penalize grantees for reduced service caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, I would like to note an additional proposed modification to the methodology staff would use to calculate past performance adjustments, as stated in attachment 2 of the staff report. For projects performed during the COVID-19 pandemic, staff would measure cost per unit of service delivered and number of units delivered between March 1, 2019 and to February 29, 2020, in comparison to the proportional number of units and cost per unit for that period identified in the project scope of work. So this would be pre-COVID. No past performance adjustment would be applied for projects that started on or after March 1st, 2020 due to the stay-at-home order. So this concludes my portion of the presentation pertaining to the Cycle 11 eligibility and evaluation criteria. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Brian Lane, to discuss another staff proposal. So Brian.
Good morning. So I'm here to talk about the Consolidated Transportation Services Agency set aside that we're proposing. To give a little background, the CTSA is a designated function that SANDAG has as part of our agency, and we receive state dollars through the Transportation Development Act to provide for that CTSA function. In 2006, through a competitive process, CTSA, or FACT, was awarded the CTSA job for SANDAG. Through that, they receive about $132,000 per year through that, and that's their only dedicated source of funding. As part of a TDA, triennial performance audit, and a recommendation in that audit, the auditors recommended that SANDAG and FACT should work together to identify and pursue additional funding sources to support its activities as the CTSA, noting that a primary challenge for FACT is facing long-term sustainable funding solutions. They are one of our grantees that do compete for funds through the specialized grant program. You probably noticed their name on the item 4 quarterly update, but they have to compete for all those funds. So their only dedicated funding is that CTSA TDA funding. A couple options that the auditors noted in the audit report was that Sandag in fact could either reapportion some of the TDA Article 4.5 funds or spend down their TDA balance in FACTS reserves. And I'll talk about those in the next slide. So currently, Sandag receives $6.6 million a year for TDA Article 4.5, and that's the specific community transit portion of those funds. MTS and NCTD are allocated 98% of those funds, which is about $6.5 million, and the CTSA gets 2% of those funds, which is $132,000. And like I said before, that's FACT's only dedicated funding source. We're not proposing to touch those allocations and ensure that MTS and NCTD provide those needed dollars for them. Another one of the proposals, recommendations by the auditors was that FACT spend down that TDA balance in their reserves. As of FY18, it was $237,000. Currently, I believe it's less than $100,000. And again, Sandag staff aren't proposing that they touch those reserves. They know those having reserves is a very important function of a small agency like themselves. Next slide. So staff's proposal is to set aside 25% of the senior mini grant and also the 5310 funds. I'm including 5310 because this is we do provide both of those projects to all our grantees. Senior mini grant is the TransNet related, 5310 is FTA related, and Transportation Committee will also look at 5310 funds when we present this to them next week. But I am lumping this all just so you can kind of have a good sense of the total amount of dollars. That 25% for each year is shown in the slide. It amounts to about 1.8 million proposed for cycle 11. In our last cycle, cycle 10, FACT was awarded about 1.2 million in mobility management projects through the competitive process. And so we're proposing to dedicate the 1.8 million towards them in this cycle. Next slide. And also as a way to ensure that there still are funds available to our other grantees, we would reduce the amount that FACT could apply from $600,000 per year per funding source that Zach talked about earlier to $200,000 a year for FACT only. And so if they were successful, we would still have 62% of the senior mini grant funds would be available and awarded to other grantees through our program. And then lastly, with this dedicated source of funding, we would want to amend the contract with FACT that we have to BRC TSA. We would add required functions in their scope of work. We would add performance measures tied to those functions and ensure that they are performing with those dedicated dollars. And we would come back to both ITALC and Transportation Committee with annual updates on their performance measures and how they're doing with this dedicated source of funding. So with that, that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll hand it back to Zach to talk about next steps, and we'll look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Brian. So lastly, here's the anticipated timeline for the Cycle 11 Specialized Transportation Grant Program call for projects. Based on this timeline, staff would present draft funding recommendations to the ITALC, Transportation Committee, and Board of Directors between January and March of 2021. Pending approval, successful projects could start between July and October 2021. This concludes our presentation, and we welcome any questions and input you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Tessa, do you have any public speakers for this item?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you. We'll bring it back to the committee for questions for staff. Do we have any questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, I have a...
Go ahead, Sunny.
I guess my question is about the funding limit. A couple of questions, actually. One is going from 600,000 to 200,000 a year is quite a difference. How is that going to impact their program and funding?
So That's proposal is only for FACT as the CTSA, because they are going to get this 25% dedicated straight to them. We want to ensure that the other grantees still have a chance for funds. So if we left FACT at the 600,000 as the rest of the grantees, FACT possibly could take all the funds, not leaving any for the other grantees. So for all our other grantees, we're actually proposing going from 500,000 in our last cycle to 600,000 for all the other ones.
Okay. Okay. And then my second question is the seating, the spacing and all that because of COVID. Is that a temporary requirement? How would you then, once hopefully we're someday back to normal, how does that work?
Yeah, and it's hard to say at this point because the trajectory is unknown. But we wanted to do this based on the information we have at this time. I think we would potentially reconsider it for a future call for project. Every 2 years we have call for projects. So if we have new information at that time, we'll evaluate. And we always evaluate and bring stuff back to the ITALC and Transportation Committee.
Thanks, guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee?
Mike, this is Stuart Halpern. I have just a couple of questions, and maybe if you could throw that first slide regarding goals, that might be helpful as to frame the discussion about my questions. Yes, is there one prior to that? Yeah, program goals. So first I want to say I very much appreciate the work that's gone into the refinements to the process and the direction you're going. I think agree with all those. I think it makes a lot of sense. And somebody tell me if this is a discussion item for a different time or even a different group. But with regard to the goal, the one thing that I'm curious about is to whether it's measured or if it's part of the intent, something beyond just pure improved mobility. I guess what I'm looking for is I'm imagining if there are, for example, 300,000 disabled people in the county of San Diego, and I'm just sort of making up a number. Is there any effort to say, okay, what percentage of those 300,000 people are aware of these programs? What percentage of those are interested in these programs? And then what percentage of the people who are interested in these programs are we actually serving? And, how can we increase the reach so that we're ultimately getting to 100% of those people know about the programs, and we're moving towards actually serving 100% of the people who want these services? And that's sort of level of analysis or metrics is missing for me, but I also realize that's not the particular purpose of this presentation, so maybe that gets dealt with elsewhere.
We get asked that question a lot, and over the years, what kind of goal can we have for this program that's measurable, that we can always relate back to the ITALC, and we struggle with that. Through our coordinated plan process, we always go out every 2 years and try to understand where the gaps are in the region, what are the needs, and what services do we have. And we always hear that there's lots of gaps. And then so we, through TransNet dollars and FTA dollars, we provide these funds. And every year or every cycle that we put this call out for, we generally get about twice the amount of applications for funding than we have available. So we still know we're not being able to reach all those gaps, but what we do look to do is, with the funds that we do give them out efficiently to grantees and get our biggest bang for the buck. I think what we do realize is that a lot more money is needed to fully provide mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. And through our last ballot measure that we were proposing, there was a huge increase in this funding. Unfortunately, that ballot measure didn't pass. As part of our work with some of our TransNet triennial audit recommendations, there was a push for better performance monitoring of all the goals across the system. And so I believe we are working with consultants on a better performance management system. And I believe, TransNet Senior Mini Grant will be included in that as well. I see Julie wants to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is Julie Wiley. I'm the Director of Contracts and Grants. The grants portion of my job title was just added in the last few months with the idea that we would work towards centralizing grant functions at the agency. And part of that would also include centralizing the data that's collected in such a way that we can create performance measures or KPIs and keep track of performance for the various grant programs. So I have taken some notes regarding the ask, and we will certainly be looking into using those and other criteria for measuring the performance of this and other grant programs at the agency.
I very much appreciate that, and I have total sympathy for the issue that funding is a challenge. But it just sort of strikes me that it would be really helpful and important to understand where those gaps are. And so if there's anything that can be done to give greater understanding of the gaps, because when we put out a call like this, it strikes me that we're just getting the response from those who can provide services in certain areas, and there may be a huge disconnect between where there are true needs or needs that just aren't getting met, and we're not seeing where those are so that we can try to find ways to provide services for those citizens in need. And so I think going forward to try to focus on a little bit on what are the needs of citizens that aren't being met through this process will be an important thing to try to be paying some attention to. Thanks.
Yeah, and if I could just add, and through our coordinated plan, public outreach, and our gaps analysis, we do produce maps of where individuals with disabilities and seniors are in the county. It's a dot map, and it's kind of fancy looking. We also layer on top of that where public transit is, and then try to identify where big groups of either of those riders or folks are. And I do identify the regions in the coordinated plan where some of those gaps seem to appear. And I believe those are in the very high priorities of strategies to address funding. It's not the best method, but it does help our grantees identify where some of those gaps are.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? All right, hearing none, I want to thank both gentlemen for their presentations and contributions, and we will move on to the next item on the agenda, item 12, Regional Bikeway Program Update, a presentation by Ms. Culp. Ms. Culp, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Nice to be back with you, this time with my Bikeway hat on to give you an update from the last time we talked, which was in February. So next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the early action program that was approved by the Board of Directors back in 2013. All told, in that early action list of bikeway projects, it adds up to 77 miles of bicycle and pedestrian improvements around the region. We're currently, and have been for a while, working on 70 of those 77 miles, or about 90%. And what this chart shows you is the progression or the various stage through kind of the life of a project. We have currently 9 miles of those 77 open to the public. We have another 16 miles in construction, and I'll show you some construction progress here shortly. But we have over half of those in the final design stage and are ready to go to construction. So it's a really exciting time on our bikeway program, and will be for the next few years. Next slide. There's, we call it a bikeway program, but all of our projects have pedestrian improvements and traffic calming in many cases, and with the goal of making our roadways safer for all users, whether you're riding your bike, you're walking, or you're in your car. And we'll do that through a network of separated or protected bikeways. We'll slow traffic down, particularly in some of our higher residential neighborhoods. We'll have be implementing a lot of pedestrian improvements, whether it could be high visibility crosswalks, flashing beacons, other ADA improvements. We're doing a lot in terms of signals, both bike signals, pedestrian signals, and improvements to overall traffic signals. And all of our projects have a wayfinding signage component. So, for example, if you're using one of our facilities, you know how far it is to get to major destinations, which way to go, that kind of thing. So those are some features on the bike pedestrian side. If we go to the next slide, though, in many projects, we have additional capital improvements, and this drives our scope, schedule, and budget for sure. The photo you see there is a bicycle pedestrian bridge that was built and opened last summer in the Cardiff area as part of our Coastal Rail Trail program. So we will have many times a lot of structures, whether walls or bridges. We'll be improving drainage. Just like any other mode, we'll have potential utility conflicts and have to get those out of the way. And a lot of times we'll need to put the roadway back together when we're done. So we'll be paving, we'll be putting in curb and gutter if necessary. All those things kind of go together into all of our projects. Next slide. And so where do we think we'll be successful? Who will use these? And certainly, you know, the serious person on their bike, the long distance folks could choose to use these. But if we click one more time on the slide, really where we're designing our program is for kind of the all ages, all abilities type of riders. And whether, you know, you're out for recreational time, you're going to the store, you're taking your kids to the school, or they're going to school, or if you're going to transit, you're finishing your first and last mile. This are really the audience for our network of separated and protected bikeways. Next slide. So I'll give you a little information on some recent construction projects or progress on those 16 miles of bike improvements. Next slide. First, we'll talk about the section of Coastal Rail Trail, 2-mile section in the city of San Diego, and this is our Rose Creek Bikeway project, and it's in the Mid-Coast family of projects. It's adjacent to our Mid-Coast project there around Santa Fe Drive. Very heavily used bicycle corridor now. The main way that folks on their bikes get from, you know, downtown San Diego area up to UC San Diego and the UTC area. Next slide. Lots of civil improvements associated with this project. Santa Fe Drive is an older street. So you see a photo here of some of the retaining walls that we're finishing up. Next slide. We've been doing a lot of drainage improvements, additional structures. We did have a pedestrian bicycle bridge as part of this project that was put in last summer. Next slide. And making good progress. So we're over 80% complete with the project. Very excited to say we'll be open this fall. So it would be great to have this 2-mile project open. And what this chart, this is the famous banana chart, right? And so that gives you a relationship between the percent of time we're taking and how complete we are. Generally want to stay within that banana curve. And you can say earlier on, we had some utility delays with some relocations, and that kind of popped us out of the banana curve a little bit, but we're making good progress now. And real happy to have this open this fall. Next slide. Next, we'll go up north to North County, and this is a segment of our Inland Rail Trail project, which will ultimately span from Escondido along the Sprinter corridor into the city of Oceanside. For right now, we are building a couple of miles in the county of San Diego and the city of Vista. And you can see a construction photo there. Next slide. I like this next slide because you know, just can't get the point across more often that how challenging it is in close proximity to a working and live railroad. You know, rails to trails is fine, but, you know, working around live railroads does have a particular set of challenges and skills needed, and we see that in the Inland Rail Trail project. So you can see how close the Sprinter is there to our work crews. Next slide. Lots of civil improvements related with this project. There is also a bicycle pedestrian bridge. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, working on some of the railing there. Lots of retaining walls have all added into the project. Next slide. 3 miles, I mentioned, in the county of San Diego, the city of Vista, very small portion in Northeast Oceanside. We'll have this open later this summer. We're over 90% complete. No one is happy about this chart. Looks much different than the other charts I'll show you today. And I would just say that this project has suffered from a number of challenges during construction, numerous redesigns, and those are always timely and costly in construction, utility delays, weather. The weather this spring really set us back. We're hoping to have this opened up a couple of months earlier than we will, and that's really due to weather. We've had delays on the contractor side, and just those challenges working so close to the railroad in those kind of special circumstances. So the one positive thing I can say about this, if I can, is that in all of our projects, we learn lessons and we turn those lessons into the next segment. And so we have an additional segment of Inland Rail Trail right now under design in the city of Vista, kind of continuing our way west. And we're looking at some of these painful lessons we learned in this segment and definitely plan to avoid those in these next couple of segments of Inland Rail Trail and really in all of our projects where we can. Next slide, back down in the city of San Diego, and this is in the North Park Mid-City area, very high residential, very dense area. About 5% of the region's population live within our family of North Park Mid-City bikeways. And so right now we're in construction on 6.5 miles, and you can see those in the green and purple lines along Georgia and Meade Avenue, and then the purple line is along Landis. Next slide. And this is a rendering. When we're finished, this is kind of a concept of a neighborhood traffic circle. And I like to show this because it kind of shows how the bicycle, the pedestrian, and the roadway improvements all work together. So you can see all the uses going on. You can see high visibility, shorter crosswalks, lots of signage, lots of landscaping improvements where allowed, by the city, and just overall general improvements with the goal of making it safer for everyone. So that's a rendering. If you go to the next slide, I see that we're underway with construction. Our crew's out there. This is along Meade Avenue, finishing up one of the first traffic circles that opened up a couple of months ago. Next slide. More construction on the circles. This is on Landis. And then last slide for this project is it's just the finished traffic circle there. And, the staff has been out a couple of times observing how it's working, and real happy with the progress to date. Next slide. So we mentioned 6.5 miles in the city of San Diego, just started in earnest earlier this year. And take another year and a half. So early 2022 is our open to the public date. And you can see how the banana curve is there. It looks pretty good right now. Next slide. Last construction project is part of our Uptown Bikeways project. And you can see that on the map. In the lower part of the map is downtown San Diego. And then we would be creating this network in the Bankers Hill, the Hillcrest area, through Mission Hills into Mission Valley, and then importantly, making a connection with the North Park Mid-City bikeways that I just talked about. So we are in construction on a 4th and 5th Avenue bikeway. Next slide. And this is 4.5 miles. If you go from our building at 401B, start up 5th Avenue, that will be our construction corridor, and then down the other side on 4th. And this is a rendering looking north. This is at 5th and about Juniper. And you can see protected bikeway on the left-hand side of the road on 5th Avenue. Lots of pedestrian improvements. This section of Bankers Hill in particular, real happy to work with the community and obtain some additional funding from the city of San Diego to put in more trees and more improvements like the landscaping and that sort of thing. So that'll be exciting for that community. Next slide. And then we do work a lot with the Development Service Division at the City of San Diego. We have 7 projects in addition to the construction ones I mentioned, 7 that are currently under review and ultimately approval. We keep them busy. We are not making as much progress, I think, as any of us would like on getting the approval process any faster. For example, Pershing Bikeway, which is a couple of miles there along Pershing Drive, along the southeast area of Balboa Park. That project has been over at the city for about 1.5 years now. We're getting very close. We're working through the last few details, but it's been a very big project, and I think we are making some recent progress, and hopefully we'll be able to advertise that one for construction in the next couple of months. So we have 7 all told over at the City of San Diego review. We have a couple of more that we'll be sending over their way in the next month or so. Next slide. I wanted to end the presentation by just talking to you about some use information that we have been collecting and maintaining as part of our overall bikeway program. And we have 8 different corridors around the region that we have a counter in the pavement that counts people biking as they go past the counter. And one of the corridors is our Bayshore Bikeway corridor down in the city of Chula Vista. And what each of these charts show you is it compares basically this spring to last spring, and how the impact of us all being at home, not driving as much, but getting out using our bikes is having on our region. So the blue line is January through May of 2019, and you can see that this is a daily average of that bikeway segment. So the blue line showing you where we were at a year ago, and then just the spikes we are seeing in our bike usage this spring. So it's been January to May of this year is in the black line. So this is down along the Bayshore Bikeway, which is a Class 1 facility along the Bayfront. This is in the city of Chula Vista. And then the next slide is similar corridor, but this is Rose Canyon. This is just north of the Rose Creek Bikeway that I showed you earlier, some construction pictures, and I mentioned that it's very heavily used corridor, and you kind of see that now. This time last year, up to about 300, 350 users on an average day with the blue line, and now you can see that we're nearly double that this spring. So it's continued to be a heavily used corridor. And the last slide is up along the Inland Rail Trail, the segments that are open in the city of San Marcos. And this counter is right at the Palomar College Sprinter Station. So you can see, about 100, 125 users this time last year, and how that's increased over, the last few months from January to May of this year. And so we have 8 of these corridors, and happy to say that across all 8 of these corridors, we've seen about a 45% increase in people using their bikes this spring over last spring. So we'll continue to monitor that. We can bring additional statistics back to you at your next quarterly update. Be happy to. So at this point, I will stop and take any questions or comments that you have.
Well, thank you, Ms. Coe. Before we take it back to committee, do we have any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair Kenny. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you very much. For the committee members, do we have any questions for Ms. Coe?
Mr. Chair, I just have a question for Linda.
Ms. House, go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi, Linda. It's interesting to see the rise in biking since March. Is that more recreational because of COVID?
I mean, we don't know. The counter just provides us with a count, correct? But with less driving, there definitely have been more recreational trips. This slide that you see here is right at Palomar College. So definitely a continuance of some of those college trips as well. That would be our opinion.
Okay, but it just seems like from January of this year to May, there's a big increase, and I'm hearing that a lot more people are buying bikes. Bike shops are running out of bikes and those kinds of things. So I was just trying to relate and see if that's really the case or not.
Yeah, definitely. You raised a good point. There's been so much press about all the bike shops, and they were able to stay open as an essential service, so that definitely helped during this time. Mm-hmm.
Good to see the trend. Thank you, Linda.
Any other questions from the community? Oh, go ahead, Les.
I was just going to add to that. I would bet that with all of the gym closures, all of those people that are usually on the treadmills or bikes at the gyms are now out on their bikes. I know I'm one of them.
Thanks, Les. Any other questions from committee?
Mike, this is Stuart Halpern. I had a follow-on to Sunny's question and then just one or two others. First, Linda, this is a great presentation, and also the data is fabulous. But following on, Sunny's question, I'm curious, do the counters also give you a time stamp so that you can do further analysis on, day of week, time of day, that sort of thing?
I will check on that. I don't know the answer specifically to that, but I'll double check and I can follow up with you next time if we bring back the data.
Yeah, it just might be interesting as you guys continue to analyze usage, and there may be some great stories that come out of that as well. But the other question I had is, and I really appreciate that you've sort of given us a little bit of a deep dive into some of the things going on with the city of San Diego. I'm curious if just even in rough sense of the miles planned but not yet under construction, does the city of San Diego still represent a pretty significant portion of that?
Yes, definitely. Of the entire program, about 3/4 of the miles are scheduled to open in the city of San Diego.
So then I'm kind of curious, for following up on this, as you alluded to, that there are a number of things that are just taking a long time. Would it be a fly in the ointment in a negative way, or might it be constructive? We actually ask for a representative from the development services group to come in and give us a little bit more understanding as to why things are taking so long.
Okay, and I know this will be a topic of the audit, the ITALC audit that's coming up. So we'll be talking more about that as well.
Yeah, because obviously don't want to, do anything disruptive, but and it will be helpful as the audit dives into that. But in the past, when we'd seen the city of San Diego having some real performance issues in terms of spending local street and road money, we asked them to come in, and they were very kind to do so. And it just seems like every time you give an update on this, it continues to be an issue. And maybe there's a point in time when we just extend them an invitation to come and have a dialogue with us. But if that would be a disruptive thing from your process, certainly wouldn't want to do that.
I don't see it being a disruption. I think that would be fine. And I'm happy to facilitate that at some point if I can.
Well, I don't know if other members of the committee have a point of view about that, but recognizing that the triennial performance audit does intend to get into this a little bit further, it just strikes me that it might be something, whether we wait for the results of that audit, which won't be till for like a year, or between now and then, others might also find it interesting to have the city of San Diego help us understand why it seems to take so long to get things through their approval process.
Stuart, I agree with you. I think that would be an excellent idea to just even learn what the reasons or what the issues are.
So how would we do that, Ariana? Would staff reach out to development services? It's something we've heard of in other than just bike projects. Anyway, what would be the best way for us to extend that invitation?
We can work with Linda and her contacts over at the city. She mentioned that she can help facilitate that, and we can look for a date that makes sense to bring that back to the ITALC in the near future. As you mentioned, it sounds like it would be something that you would want to hear sooner rather than later in terms of your performance audit timing. So I will work with Linda to make that happen.
All right, thank you very much. Committee members, any other questions? Or Stuart, were you done?
Yes, thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Linthicum. Could I make a comment about this?
Absolutely.
I think it's a great idea having the city come in, because that did work. Stuart, you said that worked very well on some of the other issues with the city a few years ago. It would also give them a chance to let you know how their bicycle network is sort of fitting in with ours in creating, connecting the city bike network with the regional bike network, and what this will all look like when we're all done. So I think it'll give them a chance to sort of show off what they're doing, especially how it applies with the mayor's his, now the name escapes me, his climate action plan. And I got to tell you, Linda has been very persistent and very patient. She's a great quarter director when it comes to this, but yeah, it's definitely been challenging. But let me also just let you know about what we're doing with the regional plans. And it made me think of what we were talking about a few minutes ago with the extra train sets for NCTD. To use that same analogy, the project we have that Linda showed with the Great Banana Chart on the Rose Creek bike path. Right now, if you want to get from Mission Valley up to the University City area, you're riding for probably a couple of miles on Santa Fe Street, which is not a very friendly street. On weekends, it's great because nobody drives it on a weekend. But during a weekday, it's just trucks and a bunch of people trying to get to work as fast as they can. And it's not a very pleasant place to ride a bike. But when that link is finished this fall, Linda, this fall, yeah. When that link is finished, you're going to be able to get all the way from Mission Valley. In fact, you're going to be able to get all the way from Dog Beach in Ocean Beach all the way up to University City exclusively without having to compete with cars. And so we're filling a gap. And so when that gap is filled, you will have even though it's a smaller percentage for the whole length, when that gap is filled, you're going to have such a great opportunity to use this and attract way more people, connecting the beach communities, which you tend to have a lot of students in the beach communities, with the University City area, which, with UCSD attracts a lot of that same crowd. And so it's the benefits that you don't often hear about of having a complete network that's really going to help out and see the ridership and the usage of these bike paths really skyrocket.
Well, thanks, Jim. It's exciting times for bike projects, that's for sure.
Yes.
Any other comments for the greater good? All right, well, thank you for the presentation. Linda will receive and file that item. Move on to our next agenda item, which is to set the date certain for the next meeting. Is scheduled for September 9th. 9:30. Hopefully we're not in the same format, but you never know. We'll be ready one way or the other. Just a question for Teresa before I skip it. Did we have any additional people show up during the meeting who would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda? It would be item 13.
Thank you, Chair. There are no continued public comments.
All right, so item 13 is addressed. Item 14, the upcoming meeting, September 9th. With that, are there any final comments from from staff at this point? And the committee members?
None from staff. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Nope. All right, well, hearing none, we'll be adjourned for this meeting, and thank you very much for your attendance and patience.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.